This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Don't worry, we've got a million of them. Sadly.
As the world turns insane.
The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be. It'll make my life a lot easier.
This is Wretched Radio. Look what I found in my never-before nicotine-stained fingers. The very thing that I was just describing on a couple of levels, that even unbelievers historically, when they consider how the world turns, have wrangled with God, and they have a very difficult time jumping over the God hurdle. If you're an honest philosopher, even Nietzsche realized, God is dead. Now what do? The whole thing is pointless. The whole thing is unpointed. It can't sustain itself. He isn't the only one. The historians Niall, I hope I said that right, Ferguson and Tom Holland, and author and journalist Douglas Murray. This is from an article from this must be French, is what I'm thinking. Mercatornet. Sorry, I don't know what it is. Talking about the evolving, no pun intended, thought of certain atheist thinkers on the question of Christianity and Western civilization. This is from Atheist Against Evolution from the National Review. Here's the quote from not from Tom Holland, but from Douglas Murray. "I know I can't achieve religious faith," said this unbeliever, "but I do think we should go to church. We don't have an evolved ethical system. I don't buy the idea that evolution alone gets us to be moral. It can modify behavior, but there's just too much evidence that in the raw, when the constraints of civilization fall away, we behave in the most savage way to one another." Paging Lord of the Flies. "I'm a big believer that with the inherited wisdom of a 2 millennia old religion, we've got a pretty good framework to work with." He's honest. He's not a believer, but he's honest. He describes himself as an uncomfortable agnostic who recognizes the virtues and values that the Christian faith has brought. This is from his book, How Christianity Made the Modern World. From a non-Christian. Why? Because at least he's being an accurate observer. But did you notice also, not only is this an example of an unbelieving philosopher wrangling with the concept of a deity, but he's also describing the metaphysical nature of the planet, an evolved moral system. Why do morals work generally? Who guides that process? Who determined them? To give it to natural selection, if you want to do that, then you actually undermine the foundation of your evolutionary belief, because you believe that things got here by dog eat dog, by survival of the fittest. Therefore, any kindness, any goodness, any self-control, any restraints that I put on my behavior that benefit you are bad. Because if I'm stronger than you, then I should be able to take advantage of you, and we need to just weed you out, says evolution. And so if you say morals evolved, nope, sorry, you cannot have your evolutionary cake and eat it too. You cannot explain hospitals, yet you visit one when you need one. You perhaps mock Christian charity, but you sure are grateful for it when you receive it. The entire godless system cannot explain the metaphysical realities of this planet. Who made up these realities? God himself. When we follow them, things tend to go well, even if you don't believe in him. If you don't, it can't. I didn't say it won't. It can't. Let's just say, for instance, you had 1 million people, all pagans, stay married. That community is going to be stronger, even if they don't believe in God. Similarly, if you've got an economy where there's 1 million people and a good chunk of them are getting divorced, you're going to see instability, regardless of faith. Why? Because that is a metaphysical law of God. Speaking of divorce, Generation X, and that would be if you were born between 65 and 80. That number keeps moving, apparently. You're suffering from an alarming divorce trend. Yikes. Gen Xers are less satisfied in their marriages, less likely to seek help, that's a shame, and ripe for divorce as their kids leave home and the patterns shift. That's saying a mouthful. Please be warned about this. Just know when your kids leave the home, there's going to be a radical shift in your house. You need to know that. Suddenly, the dynamic, the priorities, the rhythms of a home, they will shift. They will change. And, sir, if you're not thinking about that, you are going to be blindsided. You are going to be really shocked. Something's wonky here. How do we navigate our way through? Can you get rid of all of the waves that are bound to hit your marital boat? No. But you can be prepared to chart a course through them by recognizing the primary relationship in a home is marriage. That's what brings you together today and every day. Marriage is what needs to... If mom and dad aren't getting along, how do the kids fare? Poorly. Why? Another metaphysical law. That's just the way the place runs. The study shows that while 59% of all U.S. adults report being very satisfied with their marriage, that figure among practicing Christians stood at 73%, which means 27% of believers not satisfied in their marriage. Yeah, I'll tell you, would you like some good news from this article? Well, I'm going to give it to you anyway. Guess what they didn't do in this article? This happens to be from the Christian Post. Thank you. They didn't mention black and white. This is the divorce rate of black Christians and white Christians. Can we get back to it? Being more Christian when we talk about racial issues? Honestly, the world runs better when the world follows God's programs. For instance, you've got this little statistic, which shouldn't come as a shock, and it's certainly nothing to be excited or gloat about. Marijuana linked to increased risk of suicidal thoughts. Now, that's not a shocker to you and me, and yet people who run the place, our government officials, have voted in some states. I don't know how many we're up to. Is it 3? Colorado, Washington, maybe Oregon, where pot is legalized. Those are adults that made that decision. Anybody who laughed at Cheech and Chong realizes pot is not a good idea. If you ever watched, was it Keanu? What was Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Were they always stoned in those two? I don't think I ever saw the movie. Jimmy, you want to confess guilt?
No. Was you saying Keanu Reeves?
Yeah, he's in that movie, Mad.
That's
and he
Bill
talks,
and Ted.
Well, it's pretty much every movie. But the point is, where he was Bill and Ted's Excellent and whatever.
Yeah, that was it.
They were smoking pot and they were dopes. They were potheads and everybody got it. Not anymore. And things won't go well. And here is proof that God metaphysically runs the place. He wants us to be clear thinking. God is never muddle-headed. We're his image bearers. He wants us to have our heads on straight and not to be all clouded and fuzzy. That's what pot does. And it increases risk of suicidal thoughts. Of course it does. How could it not? When we fail to just use the modicum of common sense that God has left us in our brains after the fall, we're just going to do better. Now, of course, that does bring to the surface something that should be glaringly obvious. Is that all we want? Is for people to think better? No, we don't want that, simply because that's not enough to get them to heaven. Furthermore, we can't get people to think better. You can bring all of the empirical evidence that you want about the existence of God. I was reading Answers in Genesis magazine last night, Answers magazine, and they had the 7 proofs that the ark story is actually true. The fossils that are on mountaintops, they were covered with water. How else would they get up there? They crawled and died in some weird shell ceremony? No, it's evidence that the place was totally covered in water. Now, you bring that to any agnostic or any atheist, and they're going to go, yeah, but. Why? Are they stupid? No. Are they just not able to grasp it? Actually, that is true. They can't grasp it. Because in grasping that there was a global flood is to grasp that the Bible is true and that the Bible teaches that God exists and they're accountable to them. And until somebody has their heart transplanted, their brains will continue to malfunction. And that is why we are not Pharisees, we're not moralists, we're Christians who preach regeneration in Jesus Christ alone. Now, that is the only way that people can think rightly. This is Wretched Radio.
Hey,
Todd.
sweetie.
Take her around the block a few times?
Who's a good girl? You're not, because nobody does good. No, not one. Romans 5 says we're born in sin and iniquity, and our hearts are deceitful and wicked. You know that if you'd use the law which brings about the knowledge of sin.